Hello, I'm Maurice Powell. With me today is as a very special guest, Mandy Griffin, one of the finest singers the island has ever produced, a multiple Cleveland medal winner at the Guilds, and recently, of course, appointed as the musical director of the Isle of Man Choral Society. Sadly, though, we're not here to talk about Mandy and her illustrious career and or about the Isle of Man Choral Society, so I'm very sorry about that, Mandy. Perhaps you could just tell us what we are here to discuss.
Well, we're here today to discuss some diaries which I passed to you when I knew you were doing some research into music on the Isle of Man around about this time, and my mother's diaries, which I discovered some years ago, which kind of charted her time as a teenager on the island.
Many memories. Sometimes I think I'll cry.
Friday the 7th. Stayed in all morning. In the afternoon went downtown shopping with Mummy. At night went to the dance with Anne. Lush. B. Skillicorn took me home. Saturday the 8th. Stayed in all day. At night went to the dance with Anne. Awful. A Scotch boy took me home.
There were two diaries. These are quite small pocket diaries, and a number of photographs of your mum as when she was sort of 14, 15, 16 years old. The diaries date from 1953 and 1954. Put that in context, 1953, of course, was the coronation year. The diaries, I said the small diaries, the writing, and there's an entry for nearly every day for those 2 years. The writing is quite small and cramped. It's mainly legible, remarkably so, occasionally not, and very occasionally your mum used a kind of a code. Like it looks a bit like Morse code. I've not managed to crack it. Do you remember those?
I do remember those, and I also was not able to crack. I remember a friend and I sat down one day and we tried to work out what the code was, and we couldn't crack the code.
No,
so
I tried as well. I suspect it has something to do with boyfriends.
I suspect it. I suspect you're right on that score.
Of which later.
Friday the 2nd of April. Helped Mummy in the morning. In the afternoon met David as I was going downtown with Anne. He said he would phone me at 6. At night David phoned me and asked me what I was doing tonight and tomorrow night. I said I was going out with Margaret tonight, and he said he would see me tomorrow. Saturday.
A bit of background first of all. Now, your mum, JOAN HUNTLEY, was born in London, in East Dulwich. Very nice area of London.
Well, I think back in the day, she always used to say she was born on the wrong side of the river. So I think back in the day, East Dulwich was perhaps a little bit different to what East Dulwich is now. Maybe.
Well, it was certainly south of the river, but I don't think either you or I could afford to live in
I'm
East
sure
Dulwich
we couldn't.
now. So 1939, her father Herbert, not always Herbert, Bertie sometimes.
Bert, I think, I went by Bert a lot.
He was a plumber, but not just a plumber.
I never met him. I didn't know him. So plumber, general handyman, I think, odd jobs around the place,
Could
whatever.
turn his hand to anything,
I think
more or
so,
less.
yes.
Okay. And her mother, Mary, she was actually a Derbyshire lass, born in Matlock.
She was born in Matlock, Derbyshire. Her family were interesting. They were tunnel builders. Her father was a tunnel builder, and so she was one of 4. She was born in Matlock. One of them was born in Wales, one was born in Ireland, one was born in Scotland, and it just so happened that's where the tunnels were being
These were railway
built.
tunnels?
I presume they must have been railway tunnels.
Gosh.
So they travelled around. They were quite itinerant, and it just happened that they were in Derbyshire, and they were in Derbyshire for a few years when she was born, and she went to school in her early years.
That's another story, as they say.
Another story, yes.
We're never going to get on with this, are we? Because we're going to meet too many interesting people.
At night went to the villa with Margaret. David did not come, so I have to finish with him. Sunday the 4th. Stayed in bed all morning. At 1, I phoned David to see if it was all off. He rang back later and said it was not all off. He thought I did not want him. At night went to the pictures with David to see Dark Command. Renee came home and said Joyce and Anne came up to her and asked if I'd finished with David. Renee said no, and they seemed disappointed.
This, of course, is the age before rock and roll. It's certainly the age before most people had televisions. A lot of people didn't have cars. Post-war rationing was still on in 1953, although it ended in 1954. One of the things that Joan very rarely mentions in her diaries of food. We've no idea whether they had Sunday lunches or whatever. The one item of food she mentions a lot are chips. Now, I think, was it an uncle had a chippy in Douglas?
An uncle had a chippy, and also my nan used to work in the chippy, and they worked in the chippy as teenagers as well. So I think chips were a staple on the menu.
Yeah.
And I'm my mother's daughter in that regard. I'm also fond of chips. So
Really?
I think chips and the chippy were...
Do you want us to cut that bit out of the programme later? Okay, that stays in.
That can stay in.
Okay, that will go viral. You know that. Mandy Griffin likes chips.
Wednesday the 5th. Stayed in all morning. In the afternoon, went downtown to buy a blouse with Anne. At night, went roller skating with Anne. Had some chips and pop with some of the gang. Thursday the 6th. In the morning, helped Mummy. In the afternoon, went to bed. At night, went roller skating with Anne. Had chips with the gang. Anne. Talked afterwards with Roy, and he came home with me.
There is one page in the diary where she sets out a kind of a menu for a week. But it has, I mean, it sounds very dull. Porridge for breakfast, sometimes nothing. Lots of eggs and chips, stuff like that. Nothing exotic, but people didn't. I mean, Chinese, Italian, Indian food was virtually unknown then. So what else do we know? Obviously, most people got their entertainment from the radio, and of course from the cinema, which we'll come on to. We've mentioned a family car or van. At one time, they took in visitors, summer visitors, because your mum would occasionally skip off school. And, well, more than occasionally, actually, skip off school to help her mother prepare the house for summer visitors. This would be in perhaps sometime in May.
Yes.
And occasionally she would go out to the pictures with some of the visitors, and occasionally, if there was a boy there that she rather fancied, she'd go out with the pictures with him. So we know they had summer visitors. Did your mum ever talk about that at all?
They did, and... they also, at a later stage, went on to run a guest house. So I think this might have been the start. I think after my grandfather died, and I'm sure we'll come on to that in a moment, when they moved back to the Isle of Man,
yes.
my nan bought a guest house on Christian Road, and they ran a guest house. So I think these earlier times of taking in some visitors were just to earn a bit of extra cash, but perhaps it sowed the seeds for that later running a guest house.
I'm sure it did.
Experience.
Because loads of people open their houses to visitors just for the summer season in Douglas, and in fact elsewhere on the island. And of course the season started then in May at Whit Bank Holiday, and although June could be a bit deadly because there weren't so many visitors, in July it sort of all kicked off again when the big bands came over and there was a lot more going on. Oh, that's interesting. Yes, I got a note somewhere about this guest house, but that's quite further on in the story, really. Yeah, there is one entry there about the house, and they had a coal fire. Obviously, most people did. And there's one entry there when Joan says in 1954, up very early, lit the fire and brought Mummy a cup of tea. That's very nice, isn't it?
It is very nice.
Really skipped off to school.
Yeah.
At various times, she did have a Saturday job. She worked at Woolies at one point, but then later on, I think she must have left school in 1954 and worked at a chemist.
Maylies the chemist.
Maylies,
yes. Which
famous name.
It was, and until quite recently was still there as Maylies the chemist. Certainly in my lifetime I remember Maylies the chemist. So I think she used to talk about Maylies. I think that was a happy time working there and suited her much more than any attempt she ever made at going to school, I think.
No, she didn't enjoy her time at Woolies.
No.
I don't know why that was. And she might have been, how can I put it, let go.
Yeah.
And I suspect that sometimes she just didn't turn up.
I think
she
so.
didn't like it. She didn't exactly say why, but she didn't like it. But she certainly enjoyed working at Maylies and got on very well with the proprietor. His name is mentioned quite often.
Yeah.
So that was good. So Joan, a typical teenager in many ways, stayed in bed most Saturday and Sunday mornings. She used some of the sort of in-words of the day. I did a bit of a count-up, really. It shows you what sort of a sad person I am, of the number of sort of like in-words that she used. Her favourite word was, do you remember at all?
Lush.
Lush.
Yeah, lush.
Lush.
Yeah.
Saturday the 16th. Stayed in bed all morning. In the afternoon went for a walk with Choco, down on the shore, up Summerhill Glen and down through the wreck. At night went to the villa with Margaret. Lush.
That must have come from a film or something.
Must have done,
I don't
mustn't it?
know.
Yeah.
So, that was just about the highest accolade.
I think so.
Otherwise, most things were either nice or quite nice. And that could be a film, a show, a boy, almost anything really, a cycle ride. So nice and quite nice. I think I found maybe 3 occasions when she said cool. Mm-hmm. But cool, I think, that definitely comes from American films.
Yeah.
That's a bit more like the rock and roll age. It's not a word that would have been heard much in Douglas in the early 50s, but she picked it up. So she was very well switched on there. We mentioned 1953 being the coronation year. Now, that I looked up the entries very carefully for that, and she doesn't mention the coronation at all.
No, obviously.
Not interested.
Passed her by.
That family did not go to a neighbour's TV and watch, like my parents remember doing. All she did was go to a dance at the palace that evening, which may have been a coronation dance, but she never actually mentioned the word coronation or the royal family or anything. So
yeah, it's extraordinary, really, isn't it?
Passed her by, because that was really by far the biggest event, really, of that year, 1953.
Yes.
But there we are, clearly not to Joan.
No.
Fair enough. Now, we mentioned films. Now, again, I've been doing a bit of a count-up. Now, I don't know how many times you've been to a cinema in your life. Probably it's a ridiculous question, but I'm not a great cinema goer, okay? And I can remember, the last film I went to in Douglas was one of the Harry Potters. So that could be 15 years ago now. So I'm not exactly an avid film goer. Your mum was an incredible film goer. In 1953 alone, she went to 78 films.
That's extraordinary, isn't it?
Well, she
1 year.
certainly went twice, and occasionally 3 times. She went to almost anything.
Yes.
She was not fussy. I wrote down some of the titles of the films which we still remember today. Charlie Chaplin's Limelight, Prisoner of Zenda, The Cruel Sea, rather a hard-hitting war film. That I can't imagine why a teenage girl would go to that, but they just went with a dad or a mum or a friend.
Wednesday the 13th, school. At night went to the pictures with David to see Kidnappers. Thursday the 14th, art school. Afterwards went to violin. At night went roller skating with Celia. Friday the 15th, art school, worked very hard. At night went to the pictures with Daddy and Reenie to see Back to God's Country.
It's hard to discern what her personal taste in films was. She liked everything. But I think we know from her later life that she probably enjoyed the musicals most of all. I think
definitely the musicals made a big impression on her, and they were her favourite thing in life were musicals. Yeah. So definitely she would have enjoyed those the most, I think.
The amazing thing is, of course, that all these films, virtually all of them, were new. Very occasionally they'd show what she would have thought was an old film. But those old films were only 4 or 5 years old. Yeah. She was the Douglas cinemas were very vibrant, of course, and there were lots of them. Yeah. But she saw all the new films. And in the next year, 1954, I think she went maybe 60 times or 65 times to a cinema, which is incredible. I don't think I've been to a cinema 60 times in my entire life.
No, I doubt it. I don't think I have. And I wonder if whether that was a standard thing. I wonder if teenagers were doing that then. I wonder if...
Absolutely. That's the impression I get. Yeah. Because, she has a list of about a dozen friends, 4 or 5 of which are mentioned on nearly every page. And she's always going to the cinema with them. And the other thing is that she was walked home virtually every time she went out to the cinema or a dance or a club by a different boy.
I know.
So she was... I think your mum was considered, and I would certainly think this from the photographs of her I've seen, she was considered something of a beauty, really.
She was. She always talked about this. She was quite...
modest as well.
Well, when it came to how she looked when she was younger, I think she was very aware of how attractive she was and enjoyed that and enjoyed... playing it against her non-identical twin sister, that she was the beautiful one of the
this
two
is
of them.
Renee. That's still
Renee. She's Irene, but she's
Irene.
nicknamed.
That's right. Yes.
And so I think there was some antagonism with the two of them that my mother enjoyed lording it over Auntie Renee because she
Sisters,
was.
eh?
Yeah,
Sisters.
I know.
Right. And there was an elder married sister, Pamela.
Yeah, she got married really young. So I think she was 6 years older. But got married when she was 18 or 19. She died a few years ago, but her husband, my uncle Goo, he's still alive. He's in his early 90s now, so he still lives on the island.
Right.
But she was married and had sort of left home very, very early on.
Yeah, and at the back of the diaries are, of course, a list of names, occasional telephone numbers, names and addresses, and managed to identify some of her friends, but not all of them. But she had a very wide circle of friends, and some are obviously school friends as well. Now, we talk about a full life. We were just talking earlier. I remember my parents and grandparents talking about their childhoods, and they would always say, we had very little. Or my grandparents would say, we had nothing. We had to make our own fun, our own, but not June at all. She was never in. She had an incredible social life.
Yeah, always on the go, either playing tennis or badminton or at Noble's Park. That featured large in their lives. She was going to the cinema, as she said, meeting up with friends, seemed to be going to social clubs, going to dances. And I think
Absolutely.
I was saying to you, when my friend and I discovered these diaries and we were reading through them, we were saying, like, well, it just sounds so great. Like, why were we not growing up on the island in the 50s? Because there just seemed to be so much going on and so much on offer all of the time, and it sounds quite incredible, as the time she had. It certainly doesn't seem that there was ever any sitting around waiting for anything to do. Stuff was happening all the time for these teenagers.
Now, we know that June was not particularly keen on school, but nevertheless quite a lot of her activities was certainly school-based. She went to a gym there, of course, swimming, we got netball, horse riding, very keen on horse riding. She mentions a particular person on a farm that she went to quite often. Now, I've always thought of horse riding as being quite expensive hobby, but clearly not.
I think, from what I understood, with this particular horse that used to get ridden, it was sort of a friend of a friend of a friend, and
Right.
they used to just sort of turn up and would have a ride on this horse. And I think my Auntie Renee as well they were both into horse riding, so that featured.
And
quite
they used to go
large.
cycling, quite often to Onchan, must have been a friend there, and occasionally quite a distance down to places like Peel. So, I mean, she just mentions it casually. We mentioned tennis, swimming, roller skating, gymnastics. Now, at school, she had violin lessons, and actually she had violin lessons from a very well-known violin teacher on the island, quite a prestigious one. This was Kathleen Ridings,
Yes.
who was near the end of her career in the mid-50s. We know quite a bit about Kathleen Ridings. She was a force in music in the island for half a century. And a lot of people remember her and remember having lessons from her. She used to come in and out of the schools with violin cases under each arm, travelled all over the island by bus, and was a real character, but a stickler as well for practice. So she had violin lessons from Kathleen Ridings and played in the school orchestra. She occasionally took part in school plays. So even at school, which she didn't like, it was very full. I think I get the impression that art was her favourite subject. Does that ring true with you?
It does ring true. I know that she went to art school in the evening, and I think the art school at the time was run, which is now Kensington Arts, very close to where I live, actually. Kensington Arts was recently the Youth Arts Centre, so I think that's where the art school took place. And she was very proud of going to art school. That featured large in her life. And certainly when I was younger, sketches would be around the house. She'd often just be sketching things, and so I think that desire to sort of draw always stayed with her.
Oh, that's interesting. Does anything survive at all?
Nothing
at all.
Not that I'm aware.
No. Often the way.
Yeah.
We know that she was a girl guide for a while. that she did go to a local church occasionally, and she went to confirmation classes.
Yes. Yes,
Whiter than white, in fact.
Well, it does tickle me, this sort of girl guiding side on the one hand, and then a different boy walking her home every night on the other hand. I don't know if the two...
He might have been a Boy Scout.
Could have been a Boy Scout, yes,
Could have been on official business.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
Maybe that was it.
Not likely. Okay. Now, in the summer, of course, her world simply exploded with activities. She was frequently up at the Douglas holiday camp, the old Cunningham's campus was, occasionally at the Palace and Derby Castle ballrooms, and she formed a friendship with the band leader at the Douglas holiday camp, Phil Moss. Really charismatic character, very good looking. He was in his late 30s at the time.
Yeah.
Very good trumpet player. And he obviously took a fancy to Joan, and of course Joan and her mates were there for every Sunday concert, and sometimes in the week for dancing. And, she obviously caught his eye, but he was very kind to her. He frequently invited her and her friends to have tea between shows and things like that. She got to know him quite well, and some of the photographs that you gave me show Joan and with Phil Moss, and she also got autographs of a lot of his band members.
Yes.
So did she ever talk about those days?
She did talk about them a lot. They clearly really remained such a huge memory in her life, and going to the dances, going to the bands, having tea with Phil Moss. I think she was a bit starstruck by Phil Moss.
I'm sure.
So she'd talk about it a lot, especially after a couple of glasses of wine in an evening.
Stayed in all day. At night went to the dance with Anne. Awful. A Scotch boy took me home. Phil Moss said I was the most beautiful girl in the Isle of Man.
And just really how great the music was at the dances that featured Lodge. She used to really love the music and listening to the music and hearing the bands.
The bands were excellent. I was talking a little earlier today with Howard Kane about Ivy Benson, an all-girl band who were here. The year after Joan's last diary, or last surviving diary, was Ivy Benson's first year, and of course Joe Loss was here all through the 50s until 55, and she certainly mentions Joe Loss and that, but obviously it was Phil Moss that she heard most of all. Of course, the Douglas holiday camp was in its last years then, I think, because he then transferred to the Derby Castle, and she does mention going to hear him at the Derby Castle. That must have been great. I think they were both flattered, really,
I'm sure,
with
probably.
each other.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, it's great to have a fan turning up with her mates every time.
You just wonder whether was there part of him who was like, oh no, here are those girls again.
We're coming to the end of our programme, really. It's just gone amazingly quickly. But in 1956, the family moved to Australia. They were effectively £10 poms.
They were £10 poms.
And why did they move to Australia?
They moved for job purposes. So my grandfather got a job testing the atomic bomb in Maralinga in Western Australia.
Really?
So they moved for that opportunity. He didn't make the journey back. He, funnily enough, had developed cancer and died.
Oh gosh, almost certainly related to his work. Then,
almost probably entirely related to his work.
I don't get the impression they were too careful.
I don't think they were at all. So,
oh gosh, that's tragic.
So they headed off, lived in Australia, I think, for about 5 or 6 years, and then
they came back.
Yeah,
but really,
she stayed. She came back very briefly, and then went back. She lives in New Zealand now. She lives in Wellington, New Zealand now. Yes, so she lived in.
I can't keep up with the.
I know, moving around. So she's in Wellington, New Zealand. But Mum came back here, and I think she was probably 21 when she met my dad and married him.
Frank Griffin,
yes,
who had a farm near Union Mills.
Yes, yeah, Balafria Farm.
The rest, as they say, is history. I wish we had more time, because there are so many little alleyways we could dive down here.
Yes,
but it's been absolutely fascinating chatting to you about that.
Yeah, it's been great to talk about them.
Perhaps the next time you come we'll actually talk about you,
maybe. No, it's nice, really nice to revisit these diaries and chat about them.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mandy. Thank you very much.
No, you're welcome. Thank you.